Welcome, everyone. So I think we are now ready to get started. I want to welcome you all. My name is Elina Baltazzi. I am the head of communications for the European Liberal Forum. The European Liberal Forum is the think tank and foundation of ALDE Party. We have over 47 member organizations around Europe working to promote liberal ideas, freedom, democracy, and of course, we take a very, very big interest in all things technology. And the intersection of technology and the resilience of democracy. So today, I am very happy on this On the Agenda webinar series to welcome our distinguished speakers and of course, our moderator, Maret Quinn, who will tell you all the ins and outs of the topic itself, to discuss AI, to deep dive into the latest legislative framework and see what we can do to strengthen the framework around deepfakes and, of course, the intersection with disinformation. A very quick note from me before I let you to it is that On the Agenda webinar series are basically different platforms and webinars we offer once a month on different topics. We want to be able to discuss with different parts of stakeholders on important issues happening. And I want to invite you all to follow the European Liberal Forum, follow our newsletters and our events if you're interested in this content. So Maret, please take it away, and thank you all. Enjoy the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Alina, for those words, and welcome everyone. My name is Maret, and I will be facilitating this very interesting debate this afternoon. So it's a pleasure to have you all here. We have a great lineup of speakers who I will introduce shortly, and we are here to discuss deepfakes and disinformation. Now, since the term deepfake was first coined back in 2017, in the past few years, there suddenly has been a boom in technology, which means that these technologies are now more advanced, more realist. And that means, of course, that we face new opportunities, so potential positive ways of applying deepfake technology, but also, of course, the EU particularly is now facing great threats when it comes to democracy, when it comes to state security, and also when it comes to individual citizens as well. So these are the few of the topics that we'll be delving into today. And we will be questioning and examining some of the legislative and regulatory tools that the EU has at its disposal today, and questioning whether those are future-proof to deal with the risks and the threats of deepfake. Now, it's a very timely moment to have this debate. We know that the current geopolitical tensions, and particularly the situation in Ukraine, has provided a very harsh reminder to us all of the potential risks of deepfake. And only this week, we saw that the mayors of Madrid, Vienna, and Berlin, so European politicians, had been duped into a video call with a deepfake pretending to be the mayor of Kiev. So only this week this happened, and it cast a very harsh light on the risks and the potential threats that we are facing, and the urgent need for the EU to be producing some future-proof policy to tackle this. So these are some of the questions we'll be delving into today. I think it's going to be a fascinating debate. And we do have two expert speakers joining us. So I'd like to welcome first Dragos Tudorake, who is an MEP, a member of the European Parliament from the Renew Europe group, and also Kate Brightwell, who is Head of Policy and Governance Relations for the UK and Europe at Adobe. So we'll have the view from the Parliament, and we'll have the view from industry as well. So I think it's going to be a great debate. But most importantly, we want to hear from you. So those of you joining online, we really want you to take this opportunity to give your questions. What are you burning to ask us? Please don't feel afraid to send us your questions in the Q&A box. And if you can, also mention your name and your organization so that we know where you're coming from. Finally, this webinar will be recorded and available to watch afterwards on social media. And if you do want to share your impressions of today's discussion, you can also go ahead and tweet, post on LinkedIn using #OnTheAgenda. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor now to a member of the European Parliament, Dragos Tudrake. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to Elf for inviting me, first of all, for actually putting this theme up for a discussion. I think it's a very interesting one, certainly very topical, very timely. And you mentioned just what just happened to the G7 leaders. I think it's a harsh reminder of the reality out there. I'll maybe start with the precision. I'm certainly not an expert in deepfakes. So my expertise pretty much stops exactly where I started. But I am a politician very much concerned with the effects of deepfakes and, generally speaking, with the effects of digital technology on the health of our democracy. And in fact, that was probably the key motivation that I had when I advocated for the establishment of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in this Parliament, a committee which I chaired until 2 months ago, and also the main motivation behind the interest to become a rapporteur for the AI Act, which I am. And I'm a rapporteur representing LIBE, the Civil Liberties Committee, and basically I am, and this is really the fundamental objective I have in working on this file, which is to signpost properly the future evolution of this technology in the way that it actually fulfills its other objective, which is to help us grow, to help our economies, to help our administrations, to help our citizens, our societies reap the benefits and the best of what digital technology has to offer. And AI is driving all of this digital technology forward, and protect it from its harms, and from its harms which are either potential or very real. And one of these harms, both potential and unfortunately also very real already for some time, is disinformation. I think it's important also to note that disinformation is not as such a new phenomenon. Disinformation has been there and has been with us, mankind, since our beginnings. There has always been someone telling a lie about someone else, and telling a lie with a purpose. And that purpose being to undermine the trust maybe of the community in that someone, so on and so forth. But what is new now, previous to all the other disinformation campaigns or those engaging in disinformation in the millennia before us, what is new now is that AI and digital is powering up to a level where this phenomenon can structurally undermine our model of democracy and our model of society to a degree that really becomes a key threat, again, to our way of life. And that is why, again, you have this whole landscape of legislation on digital, because it's not only the AI Act, it's also the DSA, which is coming up with these new models, because it is a new model of liability and responsibility for content online, which we haven't had so far. Again, the drivers behind this legislative effort done on the European side is very much supported by this concern. When it comes to deepfakes, which is, let's say, it's a subspecies of this greater phenomenon of disinformation, I think it's so, and certainly it has two aspects, and now I'll come to the AI Act itself and to what, at least what my initial position as the rapporteur for this is on this. Deepfakes clearly has an artistic value. And if someone wants to make a funny movie and put Emmanuel Macron in it, then great. It can use the technology, and honestly, I personally think that there should be no burdens for those that use deepfakes for artistic, cinematographic, whatever purposes in this category. But at the same time, as you rightly mentioned the example of the G7 with the mayor of I think it was Mariupol or Kiev, I don't remember. You can have someone who is using deepfake to impersonate Emmanuel Macron passing a message, a political message that undermines possibly the very foundation of the position that Europe has on a particular topic, or that France has on a particular topic. And that is something that is problematic. That is something that we need to find a way to regulate, that we need to put rules in place that say this is something you can do and this is something you cannot do. And for that type of use of the technology, because I want to go back to a fundamental thing we need to understand about this AI Act. This is not a regulation that is going to put rules for the technology. AI Act is not regulating AI as a technology. It is regulating the use of this technology in certain very, I hope, precisely defined areas. That is why you have the high risks used cases in Annex 3. That's why you have very concrete examples of uses of technology in certain contexts for certain purposes, or with certain type of data. And it's only in these conditions that they become subject of the law, that they come under the scope of application of these rules. And we have to understand that, because it's very important to understand how the whole logic of the text applies. So coming back to deepfakes, what I have done, because again, I have this very deep concern with the impact of disinformation in general, but deepfakes as a subspecies of that, on again the health of our societies and democracies, I have actually taken the deepfakes, those, let's say, the bad deepfakes, those that actually have the potential to influence how we understand political positions, or how we relate to certain important elements for us as citizens with rights and liberties. I have listed deepfakes in the high-risk category as one of the use cases under high risk, which means that there will be obligations. It's not that deepfakes and the technology behind them is a bad technology or an illegal technology once this regulation will be passed. But if that technology is being directed to be used for certain type of purposes without the consent of the individuals concerned, not for artistic or satirical work and purposes, then there have to be a list of obligations of transparency, of explainability, of notification. So basically all of the conditions for the high risk use cases in Annex 3 in order for that technology to be marketed on our market. So that's the approach that we've taken. Again, I underline, and I have listened to the industry that is active in this area, and I have well understood the call for making this exception for artistic work. And in my amendments, I have introduced that exception, which I think is important. We also support industry codes of conduct and especially transparency to the users. I know this is something that those concerned, and I'm happy to see Kate Brightwell here, because I know that Adobe has done that, and I have discussed with Adobe these points. So already many that are working with these technologies have already themselves, for their own devices, let's say, they have understood the risks that come with the use of this technology in certain contexts, and they have put themselves some, let's say, self-imposed rules, which I think is great, and it shows the sense of responsibilities that these companies have. And I think that the two will complement well each other. I think the codes of conduct, that's why I'm going to encourage this also in the work on the AI Act. I think the codes of conduct and the self-imposed rules, which the companies, responsible companies, put in place, they're great. And hopefully we will find a way that it's clear also in the text of the AI Act how the two levels of, let's say, rules complement each other and don't stand in the way of each other. So, Med, I would stop here for now as an intro. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much for those introductory words and for giving us a real flavor of the complications of this from a policy point of view. As you said, we'll be delving a little bit more into the AI Act, but also into the DSA, potentially the Code of Practice on Disinformation, because we know that there are various regulatory activities going on that all need to kind of fit in together to have real impact. And I think it's very interesting what you were saying about regulating the use of the technology and not the technology itself, in a way that, you know, we can still harness the potential of the technology while also countering some of the harm. So I think that's something that we'll definitely go back into later on in the debate. But now I will hand the floor over to Kate Brightwell. As we said, Kate is Head of Policy and Governance Relations at Adobe. Kate, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you to the European Liberal Forum for organising this timely event, and for us to talk about how the EU can effectively address this issue of malicious deepfakes. And as MEP Tudorache has already said, Adobe's been leading the way in this, and that's something that would be great to talk to you about today. So, as I'm sure many of you know, Adobe is a world leader in digital media solutions such as Photoshop and InDesign and Premiere Pro, and these tools are used to create digital content, and we're empowering literally millions of European creators to tell their digital story, and it's something we're extremely proud of. AI is embedded in a lot of those products, and so this is one of the reasons that we as a company have for very many years now been taking an interest in the work of the EU and how it wants to regulate this type of technology. The way that we're using AI within Photoshop is something that is helping to remove the mundane tasks that a creator will be doing so that they can free up their time to do the things that only humans can do and for them to be more productive. And so it will come as no surprise really that for us, the use of technology and particularly the use of AI to create synthetic media is not inherently a bad thing, and we think is a real foundation of the digital economy. And we think it's really important when we're talking about this concept of deep fakes to remember that the overwhelming majority of synthetic media and the uses of it are for good purposes. But like the others that have already spoken today, we do recognize the risk, and particularly the growing risk with AI and its potential for use for deceiving. And so fundamentally, we've addressed this problem of disinformation from a point of transparency about finding that there needs to be transparency about how content is created. And this is why we're very happy to see the transparency obligations within the AI Act. We've been looking at this kind of whole issue of disinformation as sort of within the technology industry for some years. And we've come to the conclusion really that detection and takedown, whilst it's an extremely important part of the kind of fight against this, that it really is only going to get us so far as the advances in technology, but the viral kind of ability for content to be shared before it's kind of assessed and taken down. And I think we've all mentioned the very recent deepfake with the Berlin mayor. I understand from some reports this morning, which I haven't been able to dive into, but they're actually analysing, and AI hasn't been used within that technology, within that kind of ruse of deepfake. But what intends for us is around rather than detecting what's fake, it's about proving what's true. And so this is really about empowering users with good intent with when they're using AI, is to disclose how they have created that content, how it has been changed, but also whether or not AI has been used. And so we've sort of taken this mission really and founded something called the Content Authenticity Initiative back in 2019. So much further behind when the AI Act was first introduced. And the Content Authenticity Initiative, or CAI as we call it, is really a mission to establish an open source industry standard for digital content provenance. And so we've pulled together a huge group of people. We've got around 750 members now since its founding that have really been committed to this mission of finding a technical solution through open standards. And I'm sure some of you that are here today also attended the last On the Agenda session on this topic in August last year. Michael Meyer and Henry Adger, who were both talking on that panel, were proposing that provenance technology is indeed the kind of way in which to focus and tackle this issue, but actually didn't, they sort of noted that they didn't think that this was far enough advanced yet. So I wanted to just use the opportunity today to really show the progress that has been made in this area, really spearheaded by Adobe, but through a huge collective within the industry, and how this relates to the AI Act. So as I say, we've got about 750 members of the CAI now. This comes from big technology companies like ourselves and Microsoft and Twitter, to the news wires like AFP and Reuters, but also some very small European AI synthetic media companies that are committed to this issue as well. Companies such as Respeecher, Synthesia, Metaphysic, all members who are looking for how to bring this technology to life. And running alongside the initiative, in 2021, an independent standards organization was founded. This is called the Coalition of Content Provenance and Authenticity, but it's known as C2PA. And this independent organization, which was set up with both Adobe, Microsoft, Twitter, ARM, Intel, and Sony, have all worked on an open source standard specification, which was published earlier this year. Now, I don't expect that there are too many techies on this call, but that standard specification is essentially the blueprint of how this technology can work in any technology, be that hardware, software, or otherwise. And so we have essentially provided the roadmap for this. Adobe also published some open source tooling to support this just a couple of weeks ago. And this really means that this technology is now a reality. So regardless of your geographic location or your technical capability, there is now tools there to help you implement this. So whether it's a big platform such as Twitter, or whether it's a small European technology company or a camera manufacturer, there is a way in which this provenance technology can now be implemented. So what does that mean? So by the time that the AI Act is legislation, and there is the transparency obligation to demarcate when you have used AI to create content, users will be able to use this technology. There is the possibility for that to happen. Adobe is already committed to this. We already have this technology in Photoshop, and we'll have it in other products. And so this is about, really, as we were talking about, not regulating the use of the technology of AI, but the use. So when people are using technology, then they are using AI to create synthetic media, you can clearly show that AI has been used and how the edits have been made. And we think this is a really profound step in tackling disinformation by proving what's true. Just before I close out, I'd like to mention that Adobe also signed the EU Strengthened Code of Practice on Disinformation a couple of weeks ago. And we worked with signatories in the industry to bring about a specific commitment to empowering users with a provenance commitment. It's commitment number 20. And we think it's a really important milestone in showing how this technology and being able to empower users is a really important step in tackling this issue. And as I've mentioned before, regarding the AI Act, we think the provisions on deepfakes, by recognizing that industry has a role to promote responsible AI, we really welcome this. Adobe has been working in this area for many, many years. We're a 40-year-old company, and we have an AI ethics board within our company, and really value the EU's risk-based approach to this. And we think that the clear transparency obligations within the Act are the best solution for addressing harmful deepfakes in a meaningful way. So that's all I have to say now, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a lot of interesting points to pick up on there, but I'd like to start, before we delve very deep into these policy solutions that are on the table. I think we've spoken a bit about deepfake, but it's not completely clear every time what is deepfake, what is not deepfake. We've already heard that some are powered by artificial intelligence, others not. Some are used for positive causes, others not. So maybe MEP Tudorache, I wanted to come to you, because you did mention that deepfakes have been specified as a high risk use of AI in the AI Act. So I was wondering, what was the rationale and the justification behind that? And is it important for us maybe to think of distinguishing between deepfake and other forms of synthetic media that are used for kind of positive applications?
Well, as I said, I'm not a specialist, so I can't explain to you all the ins and outs of what could be possible uses of this technology that and the different levels. I can tell you the elements which, from my point of view, would need to respect these higher thresholds of transparency and explainability obligations that come with being categorized as a high risk. And that is those that, again, without consent of the real person that it impersonates, whether it's in the form of a video, whether it's in the form of a photograph, or whether it is a form of an address of a text. So in any of these forms that represent an actual manifestation, an actual expression of someone's views and positions, if that is done without consent, then it will trigger the application of the rules under the high risk category. And again, if it's not done for a purpose that has an artistic or a satirical meaning, and for that we have provided for this express exclusion exception in the text. It remains to be seen how the text will evolve and the discussion will evolve in the negotiations to come. From the indications that I've picked up in discussions with other political groups, this will be a point of interest and might trigger also some ideological discussion as well between the various political groups. It is still early to judge how much that will be the case, only looking at the amendments that we received. So I think that over summer, as we'll start working with the other shadow rapporteurs on the file and we'll actually start negotiating the compromise amendments, then on this particular point, we'll also see what the final landing zone might be. Already, by moving it from, let's say, the category of, let's say, lower risk, where it was at the beginning, in the category of just transparency only, let's say. By moving it from there to the high risk, there was already a signaling on my part of again, how important I thought that was, and how I wanted to protect the value behind, which is the interest of securing, again, our democracy, is also our freedom of speech, because there's also this other aspect of importance which needs to be protected. And at least from the echoes that I've heard so far, I think there will be support for that. So most likely it will remain there in Annex 3, but again, remains to be seen in the negotiations to come.
Okay. Also on the AI Act, I think one thing that came up quite a lot in both of your interventions were the transparency obligations on users. So this meaning content creators, content publishers, and the kind of the credentials, let's say, that they need to include in their creations to help users then critically assess whether this is truthful or whether this has been manipulated. So maybe Kate, you can bring in here. I'm assuming that you're very, very supportive after your initial comments of this being included as an integral part of the AI Act. Can you tell us a bit more about what that would mean for users of AI-powered products such as Adobe's?
Sure, yes, I'm happy to talk about that. Maybe just to pick up on the last question before I do that. I think I've been working in the field of synthetic media and deepfakes for many years now, with lots of technologists and experts, and there is no one definition of deepfakes. And I think as we have begun to talk about this within the European space, the term has sort of been truncated to catch all synthetic media or even disinformation that doesn't use AI. And so I think for the purposes of the AI Act, I think it's really important that we have a really clear legal definition of what deepfakes is and what deepfakes means specifically for the AI Act versus how that term is used sort of more generally. So I really do urge that, and I sort of echo MEP Tudorake's points around making sure that that definition is, you know, when people are making, they're not asking for the consent, etc. And in terms of how the transparency obligation would work, as I say, this is something we've been working on for a number of years now within the Content Authenticity Initiative, and we thought it was really important, and we've been working with human rights organizations such as Witness.org and Human Rights Watch and others, of like, what are the core things that a user would want to see about content. So let's take Ukraine, for example. It's a, you know, really important political situation at the moment, and you would want to be able to see, for example, you know, where that content was taken, for example, or how it was edited. So obviously news publishers will make some cosmetic edits often to photographs, and that's, you know, that's perfectly reasonable, and that's within the scope of how that content is done. But as a consumer, you would really want to see the level of edits that is made, in were things sort of taken in or taken out of that image, which would change the complete context of it. And so we've worked on this standard specification, as I've mentioned, which will give varying degrees of the type of content that you could show. And one of those is that you could indicate that AI had been used to create this image, which would allow users, certainly users of Adobe's products right now. So if we had the AI Act, you would be able to indicate that AI had been used to create your asset. We think that because we have this open standard, it's not proprietary software to Adobe, we're not making money out of this. This is something that could and should be applied by others. And again, it puts the onus on the user. So depending on the type of content that you're creating, it's really for the user to decide if and when they should be showing this transparency. And when I talk about truth, I'm talking about objective facts. This isn't deciding whether you should or shouldn't believe the content, but as users, along with media literacy and all of the education awareness, that we need to get much better at interrogating the content that we see and being able to check, does this have this transparency data in? And if it doesn't, then you might start to question its authenticity and whether it is something that you should trust. So I think empowering users to be able to disclose this helps to empower individuals. It protects freedom of expression and is a really important, significant milestone in how we address this issue.
You mentioned putting the onus on the users of the technology, but I'm guessing that this also means that eventually the onus is also on the consumer. So really the person who is consuming this media, this piece of news, eventually, whether there is more transparency on where that has come from and how much it has been manipulated or not, the onus now is really on us as consumers as well, to be able to critically determine for ourselves. And I think this, almost at a philosophical level, has quite a lot of implications, and I'm interested to know what MEP Tudorake as well has to say about this. How concerned are you that even if we do manage to get many kind of creators and companies to respect these transparency obligations, that we are going towards this society where it is disbelief by default, and that people, consumers, citizens find it very hard to distinguish between truth and non-truth, or objective fact and non-objective fact, or subjective fact. And so do you feel that might be a little gap here, despite the transparency obligations, that really it is putting a great onus on the consumer of these media to then establish for themselves, and that perhaps we are going towards a post-truth or this disbelief by default society that is potentially very dangerous?
Well, it is indeed very philosophical, but also I think a very, very important debate. And a debate that honestly I feel we don't have enough, I think, in our societies, no matter here in Europe or in the US or in other like-minded countries that actually worry authentically, genuinely about these things and the impact on our futures as societies. So, and clearly it goes way beyond obligations that we might or might not impose via legislation on those that are producing, playing, developing such tools. We are living in a society where, as individuals, we are bombarded like never before with information coming from absolutely myriads of sources, and the vast majority of those sources are totally decentralized, unregulated, uncontrolled. And even if they were, the problem still remains that at the heart of it, in fact, it is about how we as individuals relate to all this that is happening in front of our eyes, or that is coming towards us, whether legally, generally with good intent or with bad intent. Which means that in this debate that we need to have, at the heart of that debate needs to be how we educate ourselves, how we educate our kids, and how do we prepare for the total digital, half of it virtual society of tomorrow. So we need to look at the curricula. So on one hand, if we are to take our kids and this, let's say, new generation, they are already digitally native, unlike myself, for example, who did not grow up in a digital world but had to adapt to it. I still have some reflexes from the pre-digital world. My kids don't. My kids are born, and for them, a lot of what to me still comes unnatural, to them it comes natural. But to equip them to actually guide their way in a sane, healthy way through, again, the challenges of all this potential disinformation out there, critical thinking is key. So we need to put critical thinking as an absolute critical skill that we as individuals need to acquire, whether in early education for our kids that are still in school, or something that we kind of add on to our existing education if we are, let's say, later in life. But it is key to navigate all of this that happens in front of our eyes. And again, legislation that we work on, whether it's DSA, AI Act, or God knows what else, is not going to suffice if we don't build also the reflex to question ourselves when we see what we see in front of us. If the mayor of Kiev all of a sudden calls me, or if I see a president inciting to violence, well, the first reflex I should have is not to believe. The first reflex I should have is maybe I should look for that information elsewhere. Maybe I should check before I act upon the instruction or the incitement that happens in front of my eyes, or that I read because it was sent to me as if it's a genuine piece by I don't know which author that I otherwise respect, and all of a sudden, again, tells me something that to me it should ring some alarm bells. But that only comes if, again, I have built in that fundamental reflex of critical thinking that again forces me to doubt. It's true, as you're rightly saying, man, this puts us in some sort of a maybe the dystopian version of society where we don't believe in anything anymore, where truth becomes such a relative concept that basically we will learn or self-learn to doubt everything that happens around us. I don't want us to get there either. It's not what I'm saying. But I do think that through education we can sort quite a lot of this out. But that means that also in the way we are conceiving the curricula and the structure of our education systems of tomorrow, we need to bring in these realities as much as possible. We need to learn very much from those that actually work with these technologies. And no longer develop, again, curricula as an abstract, only thinking at the traditional tools for educating ourselves, educating our children. We need to think, again, a bit non-classical in the way we will be doing this. Thank you.
So it's about regulating the use of AI, the responsible use of AI, it's about creating obligations on content creators, but eventually it's also about media literacy, it's about education. So it seems to me like there are so many parts of this puzzle. Kate, from an industry point of view, I think also what we need to perhaps touch on is the platform. So I know you work with many big tech platforms on your codes of practice and so on. There is a responsibility and onus on them as well here as well to take down content. I know that you said previously that this is not I think the silver bullet, and that also the transparency, the credentials, but eventually do you think that also the platforms that are hosting this content also have a responsibility here, that they should also play their part?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a cross industry, everybody in society needs to work on this. Sort of just to reflect on the points of MEP Tudorache there, we're a technology company, and we are sort of sharing the same fears around this sort of post-truth era that we may be working towards. And that's why we thought, is there a way where there can be a technical solution that we can play our part to help in this? And we've made some really big steps over the last couple of years, but to really get mass adoption of this technology in a way that it becomes commonplace for all people when they're consuming their news or everything, exactly to be investigating what they want. And we've done some consumer research, and we know others that have done it as well, that consumers and citizens really do want these tools. And so I think when you think about what is the role of the platforms, they do a great job on detection, and I think that's where they've been focused historically in terms of tackling disinformation. But as we think about provenance technology and consumers wanting that, and thinking about how you might consume the content that you are on platforms, thinking about, are there ways in which content that has provenance metadata within it can be prioritized, and you as a consumer potentially could decide, if you're saying I want to look at a news content, and so you can up level content that has provenance in it, or others. These are things for the platforms to solve. But in terms of having an open standard, this not being proprietary software, having this as something that could be ubiquitously adopted, I think is really important. And I think that we will really only truly be successful when we do have the platforms on board. We've been speaking to all of them, as you would expect, as part of our the content authenticity initiative, and they're very alive to the work that has been happening in this area, and we hope in the future that they will play a bigger part.
Thank you. Now, I want to move on to the questions from the audience, because there's one very interesting one that we have not explored, and it's the question of non-consensual sexual image abuse, which we know is one of the major problems that comes from deepfake, the emergence of deepfake technologies. So Agnes Veneman, thank you, Agnes, for your question. She's a researcher on intelligence and national security at the University of Malta. And she says, having worked a lot on deepfakes and disinformation, what I'm missing in this debate is a gender lens. Women have been bearing the brunt of deepfakes for over 5 years. I know the Content Authenticity Initiative does not have big players like Pornhub on board, where a lot of deepfake image-based sexual abuse is shared as content. So her question is, how do you propose we take a more victim-based approach, especially in light of the fact that many content creators and the servers on which they post are scattered across the globe? So to either of you who feels that you can respond to Agnes's very valid question.
Well, I can certainly try as a start. In a way, I would dare say the whole approach of the text is, if you, for the sake of working with your words, is victim oriented, or is oriented towards protecting the rights of those that might be harmed, might be impacted by the bad use of this technology. So the whole risk-based approach, the whole philosophy, if you want, of the legislative intervention that we're doing right now is to protect, first and foremost, to protect the rights of individuals from the bad use of the technology. Number two, another important motivator for this is to do away with the biases. to do with biases, with prejudices, and that also goes very much to the bias and prejudice against women. Not only in the context of sexual violence, hosting websites or sex sites, basically, but in general. And how we do that? By increased responsibility in terms of the data sets that are being used and so on and so forth. So again, I would dare say the text itself is a testimony of how the regulators, when putting forward legislation, have actually taken a very protective approach to it, while of course trying to also find ways to continue to instill and encourage innovation and leave in a way the clean uses of technology to continue to be burden free. Remains for us to find the right balance between the interest to protect and the interest to promote. And why and how we can also bring in these platforms well, they're certainly not going to be exempted. And once the DSA starts having its effects, once AI Act starts having its effects, then also platforms such as those that right now host sexual images or like you mentioned, Pornhub and others, they will certainly have their share of responsibility on the content that they host on their websites. And for example, all the responsibilities for content and for platforms in the DSA, they will certainly apply to them as well as and the obligations under the Act in the same way.
And maybe I'll just add, as sort of the question specifically mentioned, the Content Authenticity Initiative. I think when we're talking about the sort of the fight against disinformation, the technical solution that we're working on is really something only good actors are going to use. It is intended for people that want to be transparent and open about how they've created their content and what technologies they've used. So there may come a time where platforms such as Pornhub think that it's a responsible thing that all the content on their website has, uses CAI tools. And that would be something that we should, actually be encouraging. I think in terms of where a lot of the non-consensual pornography, and obviously the questioner is the expert in this area, but we've also noticed that there's often not using proprietary software. It's taking open source, code and making very cheap free apps that are found in sort of the dark ends of the web. And I guess my concern or question is, when we're thinking about putting deep fakes and obligations on providers or creators of AI technology, that the kinds of people and the kinds of places that technology is being made where it's being most harmful to victims are not going to be captured with this legislation. So it's not a silver bullet, and I think that it's something that has a very complex approach to tackling the issue.
On that, and before we go and take the final questions from the audience, you mentioned that there are some technologies available in dark corners of the internet, but isn't it true today that also there are mainstream commercial apps where kind of face reenactment and face swap is also very much available for any commercial user? And are you concerned that the increase in the sophistication of those tools could lead us to a situation where we all have deep fake creation technologies at our very fingertips? And is that not, to Agnes's question, another big threat to this kind of trend in terms of revenge porn and non-consensual image abuse?
I'm not an expert in terms of the area of non-consensual pornography, but I think the trend that we're seeing around the lowering the barrier of entry to being able to create synthetic media, we're definitely seeing that. The types of sort of the deep fake Tom Cruise work that was done by Metaphysic, that is highly sophisticated technology from an extremely specialized person. Some more cruder versions are obviously being used, and I guess our encouragement would be that you have the ability to empower users with content credentials within that. And I think it's really important to be aware that this technology is here and now. It's being used in very positive use cases by a number of European organizations. So we shouldn't think of the technology as inherently bad. It's just some of the very narrow uses of it. And I think us being aware of those definitions is really important when we're thinking about this regulation.
We have a few questions on the AI Act. People are burning to ask more. So the first one, this is from an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure of the name. Is the AI Act considering the perceived erosion of trust in news and information that deepfake creates in our society? And how can the EU counter such trends whilst protecting the user or citizens from such content? How to increase investment and raise awareness? So maybe MEP Tudorache, you can go first on this one.
Well, I think to a great extent we've already replied to that question all the way now. I explained why I think that this text and this legislation is there precisely to protect us from these harms, whether real or potential. It is a discussion that we're going to have in the months to come as whether we have found and whether the text has put forward the right balance or not. But I'm convinced that whatever the final product will be, it will again make, let's say, our society safer and our online lives and our online presence safer, more predictable than it was before this text. Of that I'm convinced. And that includes what we were just speaking earlier about the flurry of applications out there that basically makes deepfake more and more present, not only on porn sites, but in many other. I'm also very much concerned when it comes to political advertisement and political activities on online, because again, that is also something that can very quickly turn ugly and again undermine our democracies. So all that will also come down to enforcement, because all of this legislation that we're now putting in place, DSA, AI Act, all of that will have to be enforced. The responsibilities that will come once the DSA comes into effect, that will come for all platforms, that will have to be enforced. It's not going to come natural and easy, because all this sort of Wild West pioneering type of attitude that basically characterized the emergence and growth of online and digital has somewhat instilled a sense of impunity and total freedom for many of those that were playing, particularly in the darker parts of the web. And again, all those that are hosting content of whatever nature, they will need now to think very carefully as to how they want to display that responsibility that they now have under the DSA. And it will come the hard way for some of them before these reflexes are being built as to checking themselves what they actually host on their websites. And then, as with everything new and with every new legislation that is being enforced, the effects of that will start being shown in time.
Thank you for that response. I think we are drawing to the end of the webinar. So I just wanted to thank you both for your very valuable contributions and for a very interesting debate. I will let you have the floor for a minute or two. If there are any other final pieces of information that you're burning to share, please go ahead before we close off. I think
I let Kate go first because I had just stopped.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a really big thank you to Elle for bringing together, you know, Adobe. We come from a philosophy of working with policymakers to ensure that we get good regulation, and we really always welcome the opportunity to have these open discussions with you all. And in terms of our commitment to, you know, fighting disinformation, you know, we are a bit of a one-track mind of digital content provenance. We really do think that is the future, and we're really forging the way and bringing technology industries together with that. And you know, as we sort of see the advancements in AI, we need to make sure that the AI Act is future-proof, and it is providing a way that is legally feasible and protecting the freedom of art and freedom of expression. And just welcome the opportunity to have this discussion with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you for
Well,
the record.
On my side, since I spoke at the beginning about this sort of care and duty of care that we need to have as to the societies of tomorrow and the impact of disinformation on that, I'd also stress that this is, in fact, all of society effort that we need to make. Because we're not going to make our futures safer, better, cleaner, healthier, only through the effort of regulators coming up with rules, or solely with the efforts of those responsible companies that decide that they want to act responsibly in their corners of the industry, and so on and so forth. It is a responsibility and a duty of care that we need to assume collectively, all of us. Citizens, again, in the way we choose to exercise our liberties online, just as we also do offline. We've learned to respect rules offline, but somehow online we feel that it's somewhat okay to do things that otherwise offline we wouldn't even dare to think to do, and so on and so forth. Same thing for those that are standing behind the evolution of our education systems. They have themselves, as I was saying earlier, the duty to prepare better how we educate ourselves to stand in tomorrow's society. So again, I do think it's an effort that we all need to make in order to keep this an evolution that we find ourselves in. And the last point, because I was looking at the last question that we missed in the Q&A, which was about finding the balance between regulating and controlling disinformation, and also essentially freedom of speech. And how do we differentiate between an authentic expression and a fake one, or one that is meant to disinform? And clearly, this is a balance that we also need to keep at the heart of what we do, because the one thing we certainly don't want, if indeed we want to protect democracy, not only from the harms, but also to promote one of its actual fundamental pieces, which is freedom of expression, we need to also be very mindful of keeping this balance, and of making sure that in the way we are going to write these rules, that freedom of expression offline and also online remains something that our citizens can continue to safely continue to do. They can continue to express themselves, but just in an environment that is better protected and that actually protects their rights better than it is today. So thanks again to ELF for this invitation and for choosing the topic, and looking forward to another occasion.
Thank you both. Thank you to both our speakers. I'm sure the audience would agree with me that it's been a fascinating debate. So in conclusion, I think regulation, policy, industry collaboration, but also responsibility on citizens, if we are to fully harness the potential of synthetic media while protecting freedom of expression, but also countering the potentially harmful threats for democracy, for security, and for our individual intimacy as well. So it's been a very comprehensive and well-rounded debate. So thank you both for your contributions. And of course, thank you to the European Liberal Forum for another On the Agenda webinar. Thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.